I'm Galvin.
And I'm Author Function.
And this is the Secret Boss podcast where we talk about the best auteurs in gaming, whether they deserve that title or not. And today, we're talking about a very special person, my favorite game dev as of right now, a man by the name of thecatamites. And he goes by a bunch of other names also, Garment District, Harmony Zone, there's like a million other names, but it's mainly thecatamites. How do you even go describing this person? This is a very interesting game dev in that if I had to describe him in like one sentence, I would say he makes eclectic, dense but short games with a bunch of pasted together aesthetics and flippant millennial leftist dialogue. And
I was going to say, if you made a Tumblr collage and put it into a video game where you wandered around like a Yumi Nikki character, that's actually not true for most of them. I would focus mostly on the Tumblr humor collage as a game.
He's kind of like if Ray William Johnson and Smosh were like one game dev, like mashed together. You know what I'm saying?
I completely disagree with that reading. I cannot identify a single equals 3 or Smosh thing in this.
I just wanted to get that in the first 5 minutes, just so just so that's permanently associated with his name when you look it up on the internet now.
Okay, well, much like a lot of these games, I do not really understand where you're coming from, but there's enough logic behind it where I can kind of see where it's going, but I don't.
Maybe it's better not to talk about what his games are, but rather just the general impression you get from them, because I feel like that's a lot more consistent when it comes to playing his games, which is like a perpetual state of confusion, kind of understanding, but not really understanding things, laughing at random non sequiturs that come out of nowhere, and just kind of like pondering the state of a video game while you're playing it. I don't know if you notice this a lot, but like a lot of his video games, I think, are about the experience of playing video games and the weird kind of feeling you get experiencing them as compared with other artistic mediums.
Right. These are very self-aware games, and that's a pretty consistent part of these work. Another like really consistent theme I'm seeing a lot of is a lot of verbose characters that are using big words and handling big ideas, but also doing it in an irreverent and flippant way, where they're using a kind of shitposty tone. And there is also a lot of stuff going on at any given time. So imagine having just a bunch of pop-ups on your computer all at once. And that's really what you're going to get with any of these games, is having to interact with a gigantic flow of information and trying to catch whatever you can get.
Yep, I would say so. Speaking of gigantic flows of information, maybe it's better if we just start by diving into one of his games and seeing what comes out instead of tackling trying to describe his old URV or whatever. I'm going to start us off with Space Funeral, which is, guess, his most popular one. I'm not sure if it's his most popular one now, but it was popular really back in 2011 in that it's named alongside a bunch of other games as like weird RPG Maker projects. Off, Hylix, Suits, stuff like that, basically. And Space Funeral is listed as one of them.
Yeah, so this is a part of the big indie wave where you had a lot of weird games, horror games, and a lot of weird horror games. And Space Funeral is one of those weird horror games. I don't really know if we'd consider this a horror game because I wasn't personally scared at any point, but it has a big horror vibe to it.
It's creepy at the very least. You open it up and there's a gigantic face that says Space Funeral. And instead of new game, continue, and quit, all the options are blood, blood, and blood.
It's honestly like camp horror. Not saying that's his intention, but like it gives the impression of you are supposed to be scared at this point, whereas in effect it's just like, oh wow, look at this like a silly little edgy thing going on. And when you start the game, there's blood everywhere, there's skulls and decapitated humans, and it's in a cartoony art style that is difficult to really like be afraid of, but it still has a slightly creepy atmosphere in that children's creepypasta way.
To start from the beginning, it's a game made in RPG Maker. You play as Philip, who is this boy who's constantly crying, and you're supposed to defeat this evil witch who is in the castle somewhere. You meet some friends, like Leg Horse, a horse who is only made out of legs. You find a bunch of weird NPCs. You do get into like real battles that are technically real JRPG battles, although they aren't very difficult and are mainly just an excuse to like hang jokes on top of things. I mean, the whole game is you running into a bunch of different jokes, a bunch of different environments, a bunch of different music. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I don't know if this is directly inspired by Earthbound, but I would definitely put this in the Earthbound-inspired RPG genre, where everything is very self-aware. When you go into a battle, there's probably something silly or goofy going on. When you talk to the NPCs, they will say something like very humorous about their video gaming situation. I can't remember any of the specific, but it gives the vibe of, oh yeah, I know what these are video game tropes, and these characters aren't really people, and they're just here to give a quick jokes, and then you're gonna move on. It's in this horror setting though, which gives it a kind of unique feel compared to a lot of Earthbound inspired RPGs, where you both get that sort of fun, flippant attitude with an underlying feel of, I want to say, disturbing imagery, but like there's something more going on to it than just the surface.
Yeah. The reason I started with Space Funeral is not just because it's his most popular game, but also I think because it's this kind of like, in the same way that Blue Velvet is to like David Lynch, in that it's this kind of work that defines his working philosophy, even if he didn't intend it. You can kind of apply the philosophy from this game to everything else that he's done over the next few years. Spoilers for Space Funeral, I guess. I think by this point, hearing the plot, I think you can understand that the plot doesn't really matter. But there's this wonderful thing at the end of the game where you finally confront the witch as Philip with the leg horse or whatever, and you defeat the witch. And it turns out the witch, there's this thing at the end of the game where you finally confront the witch who's been messing with everything, apparently. She's been like changing the world in all kinds of very weird ways. You defeat her, and she says, okay, fine, you win. I'll return this world to its normal state. See how you like it. And then the final stinger is, as you walk out, all the characters and environments are replaced with the standard RPG Maker tile set and characters. And then the game ends. So, as it turns out, the entire world was just a normal, extremely conservative, basic standard fantasy template for RPG Maker. And it all just got really fucked up and weird because this witch changed everything around. And I think that sums up the Canamites' whole philosophy, in that he takes these kind of standard prefab tile sets and engines like RPG Maker or Adventure Game Studio or whatever, and just kind of mashes them up into like different piles of mulch that clash into each other and don't necessarily gel well, but are more interesting than the most extremely generic ways of working. Would you agree with that?
Right, because the end of Space Funeral is very bittersweet in a way, because while you're playing through this game, there's a whole huge amount of creativity happening. You see lots of art that is like strange and interesting, a lot of clashing tones, but it's all interesting and unique. And it may not be perfect, but it's something that is worth experiencing. And then when you get to the end and you see the characters just sort of revert to a standard RPG Maker thing, like you can really see the thesis right there, that this may not be polished, it may not be perfect, but it is better than just being standard and doing everything quote unquote correctly, because you got to do something unique, you got to do something interesting, and that's really worth doing. And you can see that in pretty basically all the future games happening in the future.
And this ties into something I think is really interesting about the Catamites, in that he's written a lot of blog posts over the years about what it's like working in game dev and what he wants to do with art and things he finds interesting in art. And what you see over and over and over, even just getting a basic glimpse at him, is his contempt for video games as a medium. He doesn't think they're a worthless medium. Obviously, he wouldn't be working in it if he thought that, but he does think it's a very like frivolous medium, in that is kind of doesn't, deserves not the right word, but like it's kind of better if it's not treated as a serious art, or at the very least, if he doesn't treat it as a serious art. He likes video games because they're a kind of carrier of aesthetics that allow you to explore a world and kind of observe your consciousness. That's a thing he talks about a lot. Observing your consciousness as you play a video game, and how it kind of ping pongs from the UI to the enemies to the text, which you don't really read, and sometimes you do read for the plot, but mainly you're reading to see if you can get any objects out of it, and your kind of vague satisfaction when you see numbers increase. He prefers all of that over the actual story of a game or the mechanics of a game. And he proposes this idea over a series of his blog posts of computer games as a kind of cold and uncaring interface that doesn't care about you. And because it doesn't care about you, you can press your kind of internality, your consciousness, against this kind of object to see what comes out. Because it doesn't care about you.
Right. These games aren't really games in a typical way with numeric progression systems. They're usually kind of wandering games like You May Nikki or LZ Dream Simulator, or adventure games where you're just clicking around the screen and seeing progression in the stories and dialogue. And they feel very indifferent to the player. It's not trying to give you like a power fantasy or do a strong plot progression that you're involved with. Instead, it's just sort of presenting you these different ideas, different texts, different images, or different experiences all at once, and then sort of giving you that affect and giving you that experience. And it's really your opportunity to feel and think about these things in your own way, sort of get your own experience through it, because there's no coherent way to get just one reading out of any of these games specifically. Or at
Yeah,
least that's
I
my
think it
feeling.
I think it ties into something you said earlier about horror camp in Space Funeral. In that, when you open the game, you can tell that it's trying to be creepy in specific ways, but maybe isn't creepy to you. The Catamites talks about kitsch in his aesthetics as a kind of like way to get around things. The Catamites describes kitsch as a kind of phenomenon in art that pre-processes how you're supposed to feel about the work of art in itself, like the way a laugh track is in a sitcom, where the work of art is doing the laughing for you as you're watching it. By doing some things like processing Space Funeral as scary, by just showing you scary things and being like, this is kind of a horror game, you can kind of get past that and marvel at the more interesting things, like the weird things NPCs say, or like the interesting works of art, or the little bits of music slipped in between each area. That's what he really cares about, and he keeps bringing that up the same way he's interested in like character actors in horror movies that just kind of appear and say weird things in between all the monster killings and things like that, or even rom-coms. He had this phase where he was writing a lot about rom-coms in his blog, and like the interesting things character actors were saying in the background, or like the interesting details of how they thought rom-coms, how rom-com writers thought life was supposed to be when it was ordinary, not related to the romantic stuff.
Yeah, I just want to reflect that kitsch attitude by talking about the first game that Galvin showed me from the Catamites, which is Harmony Summer Hardpack Tape 11 in 1. This is a web game that he showed me about a year ago. And he's like, oh, yeah, this is a really great game. I want to show you this. You should play this. And it was sent to me, and I played it. And I was like, what is this? What is going on? Because the presentation of Harmony Summer Hardpack Tape 11 in 1, from now on I'll call it 11 and 1 because I'm not saying all of that. It's just like this bright yellow web page with a bunch of links. It's just very basic HTML web page, and whenever you go to anything, basically loudly plays a song, and there is a game that you can interact with on the web page, like a little flash game. And it's like, okay, there's this music loudly playing, or we're presenting what the music is, and now you're going to do this thing. Or and it doesn't even give you a goal. You just gives you the controls, and I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to do here? What is going on? And I never really got an answer to that for any of these games. I don't know if I played them quote unquote correctly. I just sort of interacted with them and seeing what I could do with them. And some of them were confusing and kind of boring, and some of them were really interesting and fun. So I don't know. I had no way of understanding and coalescing this into a single idea. It was just mostly me playing the game and seeing what I can do with it.
Spoiler alert for all the 11 and 1 heads. Pause this video now if you're extremely serious about not getting spoilers for Harmony Summer Pack 11 and 1.
What
There's never an
spoilers are in this game? What are you talking about?
there's never an end state for most of these games. There's no goal for most of them. One of my favorite ones is one where where you have shooting mechanics, and there's a guy following you shooting things at you also, but you realize after like maybe a minute of playing that there's no actual damage system. You can't actually hurt each other. You're just firing particles at each other, and none of them ever register as being hit or anything. The Catamites does this a lot on purpose. If you read into his blog, he has a very good explanation for this, I think. He attributes a lot of his philosophy to growing up in Ireland because he is an Irish developer. I think he still lives in Dublin. And he was introduced to video games as this kind of thing that was popular overseas in America and Japan. And he didn't really understand them because when you first play video games, you're like, what is this? When you play Super Mario Brothers and you're a guy who's like a square tall and you eat a mushroom and you grow into like a taller thing, you're like, how can you possibly explain this? But because the Catamites was living in Ireland, where video games weren't as popular as in America or Japan, he just kind of assumed that there was an explanation for it overseas that he didn't know about. There was a kind of gap between this kind of confidence in these what these games were saying, in saying that yes, Mario grows because he eats a mushroom, and there's kind of some explanation for it that you probably don't know about, and the fact that he didn't know this explanation that kind of allowed him to dream about what was in between. So in a way, it was kind of this that formed part of his philosophy in like video games confidently asserting themselves, but also you not really knowing what that assertion was or what it means or what any of it means. He loves confusing people in that way. And these kind of things that were like these in creating these kind of closed systems that operated on their own terms. And you have to kind of like pick out whatever it is in this thing. And you'll never know. You'll never figure out what it is.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to talk about like one of my favorite games there where you're playing as a farmer and you have like this whole family and everything and you go around and you just you collect all or like get all the wheat or whatever. So you go around, you get all the wheat, and then it's like, okay, go to the next day, and then it's like, collect all the wheat. It's like, okay, I'll collect all the wheat, and it keeps going and going. Except, like at some point, the dog dies, and your characters get old, and it's like, does this ever end? And I can't really remember if there was an end or not, but I was like, okay, I'm just gonna keep doing this, just gonna keep on getting the wheat, and it's just like a very joke of a game where it's very self-aware, and yet there is another game where it's like a game where you play as a bunch of mice and they're moving in accordance to the music that's playing, sort of like a rhythm game. And you're able to move your mice in specific ways. You move them up, down, left, and right. And there really isn't anything more to it. There are a bunch of like sort of cutscenes that you can see them dance around in. And there is no goal, but it just is inherently fun to just move the keys in accordance to the music and have them do a little dance. And I want to say that's a criticism of the rhythm game or anything, but it is atypical and it just sort of makes you have to like deal with the inherent ways that you're interfacing with the game instead of a specific goal that you're getting to, which was another really interesting about thing about it.
I think the Catabytes also finds something interesting about video games that he can't really articulate. If you go into his interviews, you'll find that he has a lot of contempt in what he's doing, and he's like, I don't know why I'm making these games. I don't think they have much of a point. I think I'm just like kind of wasting my consciousness doing this. And sometimes I make games that I find likable and sometimes I don't. It's like weirdly nihilistic and pessimistic. And it kind of makes me feel bad for him. Actually, not really kind of, it really makes me feel bad for him. But he also talks a lot about the inherent joys of making video games, in that he thinks something that's very interesting. Something that immediately hooked him into playing video games was just the experience of being able to draw a sprite and seeing it move around in like RPG Maker, being able to immediately control it. He thinks there's something very pleasurable about that. And he also describes this kind of interesting technique. He also kind of describes this interesting phenomenon when it comes to working in RPG Maker for him, where it just kind of like dilutes his consciousness. Like he boots up Unity or whatever, and he like plays around with 3D models or whatever, and he describes it usually as 80 hours later. He describes it as 80 hours later, you wake up in the middle of nowhere and you've made a huge sewer dungeon in RPG Maker under the castle, and you don't know why or what it leads to or any what the point is of it all. But yeah, there's something inherently interesting about these kinds of things that he wants to point to that isn't really able to be described in words, I think. That's if there was another thesis for the Catamites' work, I guess it would be that. Let's talk about I think Goblet Grotto is a very good example of this. Goblet Grotto might be his second most popular game. I want to say it's his second most popular game, but Anthology of the Killer just came out, which we'll probably talk about later, and that's become especially popular. Goblet Grotto is so funny because it's like it might be the biggest parody of what video games are and how strange they are in his whole work. You boot it up, it's like this dungeon crawler RPG where it's like a third person behind your back kind of game where you play as a frog with a sword and your goal is to collect goblets. And you can tell this goal because when you hit the help button, this says that your goal is to collect goblets. But the goblets don't do anything. You're walking around. There's like 10 million systems going around all at once. There are a bunch of 3D corridors that lead nowhere. There are NPCs you can talk to that just toss out non sequiturs, and some of them attack you and some of them don't. And you can kill them and they turn into meat. and it doesn't matter. You collect goblets, and also that doesn't matter. Your frog is spouting an extremely specific hieroglyphic language every 5 seconds that makes this really loud noise. And you can go into the folder and find a hidden PDF that translates all these glyphs into a secret language that you can interpret. And that language tells you things that you already know, like I'm hungry or I'm tired. So there's no point in interpreting the language also. There are like 50 paragraphs hidden in this PDF that you can translate from different parts of the game that don't really tell you anything. There's a text box in the bottom right corner that tells you things that don't matter in the game. And really, all you're doing is just walking around, exploring the environment, collecting things that don't matter, doing things that don't matter. And it's very mesmerizing. I don't even think there's an ending to the game. You just kind of keep walking around and you talk to NPCs and then you kill them and then you eat their meat, and none of that does anything. Sometimes you die and sometimes you reload, and then when you're done, you just close the game.
Interesting. That was one of the games I did not play, and in a way, I feel a little bit relieved that I did it because that sounds like a pain. But
It's really
that
fun, honestly. Legitimately, I
okay,
had so much fun playing it. And I know I described it in like a kind of a kind of a bleak and pointless way, but I think that's pointing to what the Catamites is trying to say about all these things, in that video games are kind of pointless toys in the way he sees them. At least a lot of them are. And even like attempts for video games to assert themselves as high art haven't really succeeded in the industry so far. And he's pointing out that even though these things are pointless and most people won't get anything out of them, there is just like an inherently fun or interesting way of playing them that appeals to a part of the brain that you can't really describe. I feel like reading a little bit of behind the scenes here. I spent like a month reading his blog posts, and they're like not like bleak or pessimistic necessarily, but they're also so like limited. They're also like so straightforward in describing like how they have such like a limited optimism for the medium that it kind of made me depressed. And then I started playing the games after a month of about only reading this guy's stuff, and I was like, oh no, these games are fun. He's always talking about this kind of fun, but it's hard to describe in words. Once you really start playing it, you can really feel it.
yeah, I don't really feel any pessimism within these games, where there might be some of that in the blog posts and everything, but within these games, it's just like fun and funny, and like there is still that inherent fun of wandering around and seeing different things and exploring. It doesn't like stop you from exploring and finding new things. Like there's always something new and interesting going on within these games, so it doesn't feel actively contemptuous. I can read some pessimism towards a larger game industry in these, because they're almost entirely avoiding sort of quote unquote gameplay, instead just focusing on just wandering around and using the medium as a way to deliver multimedia art, I would say. 10 Beautiful Postcards is like the one of the first major project that attempts to do this, in my opinion. It's kind of a you made Nikki like, where you're wandering around within the game and seeing lots of things, but it's so grand and expansive. There are probably hundreds of NPCs that are saying something um, new and quirky, and just trying to sort of either get you to think or laugh or just experience or feel something. And it is also much more ambitious than the previous games that I'd seen, in that, not to speak down to these previous games, but you could pretty easily do almost any of them in a pre-made RPG maker or adventure game engine, and many of them were. Whereas with 10 Beautiful Postcards, like, wow, there are sections of this game where it's like, oh wow, this is something new and inventive that really couldn't have been done before in the previous games here. And it just feels so ambitious, even though it's still fundamentally doing the same thing.
I kind of agree and I don't agree at the same time. I don't really think this is doing something very different from what these other games are doing, in that it is a change though, in that this was his first commercial game that he marketed after I think about like 7 years of making just free games on his own. It should also be noted that the Canamites works a full-time job, and he still does. He hasn't been able to make a profit off of most of his games, at least enough to make a living. So he's still doing that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think this is his first commercial game, and the only the biggest change in that is that it's just like a really, really big game. You say ambitious, but really, when people say ambitious, usually it's going to be, they're usually talking about like how there's so many different mechanics or like so many different ways to fight or all these different secrets and things like that. In 10 Beautiful Postcards, ambitious means what if I just put a lot of stuff in a game and you can't really interact with them or really like they don't really mean anything. It's just what if I just put so much stuff in a game? Um, this is kind of a weird comparison, but I'm going to say it because I know maybe you'll like it. It reminds me of the film Playtime by Jacques Tati. Jacques Tati was a French comedian filmmaker who made this film called Playtime, which is this big kind of lampooning satire about modern life in the city. And he built gigantic cities, and the movie is famous for having all of these gags all over the screen that you have to look for, otherwise you'll miss it. It's like a Where's Waldo of gags. But you look around, and most of the gags are mostly, and I'm not saying this contemptuously, mostly just things like this woman has a funny hat. This guy walks very funny. This guy says things in a funny way. This woman dropped the scarf and it looks like a rat, but it's actually a scarf. It's things like that, like really, really small jokes that don't have much depth to them. But there's so many of them that it just kind of overwhelms you. And I think that's what 10 Beautiful Postcards is doing also. There are like 10 million NPCs here, and all of them are saying things like, do you like my funny hat? I have a big snake. Things like that. it doesn't mean it doesn't really it, it doesn't really it's so like it's so strongly asserting that it doesn't have a deeper point to most of what it's saying, that in a way you kind of just have to like pay closer attention, because like what kind of a person could make something like this is was my reaction when I was playing this game. Like how does this thing exist is kind of my reaction to it.
Right. It is a pretty like big flow of information, like many of the other games. But when I say ambitious, I mostly mean like it is mostly because of the size, but also there is more effort into the art of this game than like the physical art assets within the game. There are 3D models, and there are also sections that are being more interested in the camera and the way that things are presented, and doing lots of really weird, interesting things with the engine that is experimenting on a programming level in a way that I hadn't really seen in the previous games, is mostly what I mean there. But yeah, I agree with your overall assessment of lots of things going on at once. You sort of have to like seek out what you're trying to get away from it. Otherwise, you'll just be overwhelmed.
I don't mean to undermine you, but I do think a lot of this has been tackled in his previous games. Actually, the very first couple games he made in Adventure Game Studio were made from 3D kind of like claymation or like pieced together assets. A lot of his earlier games are like point and click adventure games with like where all the setting where every room you walk into is just like a cardboard box covered by aluminum foil that's clearly just a photograph he took. All the characters are like little clay dinosaurs that he made or Lego people, things like that. And he does start playing with 3D models in Goblet Grotto and things like that. But yeah, he's building to something, I think. And I think 10 Beautiful Postcards is one of the biggest payoffs of what he builds to. Yeah. In working with Unity, in working with all these different kinds of aesthetics and kinds of things. In that 10 Beautiful Postcards is kind of just like this 50 car pile up of different aesthetics and things that don't necessarily match together. It's like going back to the philosophy and space funeral with Unity and all, but now we're doing, claymation here. Now we're doing sketches here. Now we're doing 3D models here.
But would you agree that Anthology the Killer is a step up in ambition?
Yes, it's. I don't want to use that word "step up in ambition" because that implies I don't know. I think that
Okay,
implies
yeah,
some kind of contempt for what he was doing before, which I don't agree with at all. Anthology of the Killer. It's also something to point out that he probably wasn't building up to something for like. We started in 2009. Anthology of the Killer came out in 2024. He wasn't building up to something for like 13 years. He didn't have like a plan or anything. This is just kind of where he ended up. But Anthol- Anthology of the Killer, if we're going to talk about it, is very interesting to me because it kind of takes a very different approach to his working mindset. Um, to compared to his previous works. For one thing, and maybe this is like too much for me to say, it might be the first game he's made that's about something other than playing video games. Would you agree with that?
interesting. I wouldn't really say that the previous ones were solely about video games, like a
Yeah.
Murder Dog 4, The Trial of Murder Dog, and Crime Zone feel like
Mhm.
very much commentary about police. But I think that what differentiates Anthology of the Killer for me is that it is more interested in getting the player to like sort of comprehend it. It's not experimentation for sort of experimentation's sake, where it's like, what can I do here? And what are some strange ways to sort of unnerve the player? Instead, Anthology of the Killer is still doing a lot of that, to be honest, but it is more it is easier a lot easier to understand. You're usually only seeing one text box at a time, and while it is often confusing, there is usually a plot in every single episode of this anthology series, where it's like, okay, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there are characters throughout that are staying consistent through each individual story and throughout the entire series. It's like, okay, this is a character that has these thoughts about this, and they have these motivations, and this is what your goal is through the level. And through each level, basically your goal is to avoid dying from whoever the killer is within that level. So I'm not going to overstate this. I don't think it's focused on that. I think it's still focused on exploring and sort of experiencing the multimedia art throughout the game. But it is, for lack of a better word, a lot more commercial. Like, this is something that I can recommend to someone and say like, hey, you should play this, and I wouldn't feel like I'm pushing on some weird experimental game on them. But yeah, that's my read of it, at least. How do you feel?
Yeah. I feel like I misstepped earlier with something I said. I feel like it's not the first game that's about something other than playing video games. That was a misstep. I feel like a better way to put it is it's one of the first games he's made where I feel like it's easier or more allowable for you to care about the story than other things. That's a bad way to put it. It's one of the first games where you're kind of expected, maybe not expected is the right word, but it's more important for you to care about the story and the characters. Or at least it's one of the first games I played where I really cared about the characters and what happens to them in each part of the game. So to
Wait, you
actually
don't care about
describe
Glimby? You don't want to be best friends with Glimby?
that's my bad. I kind of put a knock on Glim. I'm sorry, Glimby. That was a really important part too. Yeah, Glimby's a really good character. Everyone else can go fuck themselves though. Yeah, except for Murder Dog. Except for Murder Dog. Damn it. See, now I'm. This is the part where I start to poke holes in my Alturas theory. This is where Altura theory falls apart. You can't ever map a real theory onto this guy.
I mean, like, to again take this more seriously, I feel like there are a lot of lovable characters. I like Limby, I like Murder Dog, and I like Leg Horse. I want to say from Space Funeral,
Yeah,
but they are very surface level characters. They're more like joke characters, where it's like, oh hey, this is funny, this is all good, like you would see in like a comedy cartoon or something. Whereas with Anthology of the Killers, like, okay, these are characters that are a little bit strange, but you're still supposed to take them seriously. Maybe closer to Twin Peaks than to, say, SpongeBob.
so, to describe what the game is actually, Anthology of the Killer is a collection of 9 games he released over the past from 2020 to 2024. He released them for free, so you can technically get them for free if you want, but there's also a paid version that includes like bonus tunnels that explain things to you, which are very nice, I think. Anthology of the Killer is about BB, who is, I'm pretty sure, a girl in her 20s growing up in XX City. She makes zines in her spare time and she works at an insurance company um, full time. Should also be noticed that the Catamites worked at an insurance company full time when he was making 10 Beautiful Postcards, right? What you know. Anyways, what's interesting about XX City is that it is a town self described by some people as a town whose primary export is murder. There are murderers running around killing people. Murder is the biggest export they're talking about. They constantly advertise murder. There are all sorts of different murderers walking around everywhere. And BB is basically like a kind of traditional horror movie protagonist, not in that she's screaming all the time, but that she's constantly getting accosted by all of these murderers in episode after episode after episode as she's writing her zine reports. So it's the first ever story that's kind of like a serial story. There are several episodes, but they all have a consistent through line in when they take place, and it builds up to something at the end, and they're all about BB mostly.
Yeah, and each of these sort of sub stories are more pointed and thematic than previously, whereas the previous games are often just like throwing a bunch of different concepts at you at once. These games are very pointed in their critiques. Like, one of them is like a art museum where it's criticizing moralistic art, where you're supposed to like have a clear good message behind it and have art that is supposed to be nice and moral and make you into a more ethical person. It's a very pointed critique of that. Whereas with previous games, it's kind of difficult to sort of parse what the theming is supposed to be. Here, the critique is much more pointed and you can sort of much more easily understand what is going on. Not to say that is better or worse, but it is much more easy to recommend to someone and much easier to read. I really enjoy seeing these thoughts portrayed in a very pointed way, but still having that vibe of like having lots of information thrown at you, having like a sort of whole world and all of its problems being thrown at you at once. And it's all part of the same thing, but it's still focused on just one specific idea.
Right. This is the game that walks like it pays most attention to both sides of like avant-garde tendencies and also like consistent 3-act structure, like screenwriting esque tendencies, in that it kind of fuses the both of them, which is of course not better or worse, but I think it is more recommendable to some people. Although you can also recommend Space Funeral, I think, as this kind of like flippant thing. But this is something to
Well,
be taken more seriously.
you mentioned David Lynch earlier, and I have to say this really is like Twin Peaks if Space Funeral is Blue Velvet.
Legitimately, I've compared it with Twin Peaks: The Return, like I think like 5 times in written reviews, which is too many times. But, yeah, it's interesting. To without spoiling too much of what it's about, it kind of feels like this extremely pointed political statement about where we are right now, especially in 2024, with like rising fascism and trying to struggle as a 20 something while people all around you are murdering each other and everything's going to shit. It's kind of about that, basically. It's a very leftist game. Maybe I'm explaining too much. Maybe I'm dissecting the frog here, but like one of the funniest jokes, the running joke, I think, throughout the whole thing, if you were going to describe it as something, is that this whole town, XX City, which is dedicated to murdering people and where all anybody cares about is murdering other people, and there are murderers running around, and it's a world dedicated solely to murder, is that there are a lot of terrifying similarities between it and our universe. Like one part in the later game where they just reveal that Lockheed Martin exists, like like 1 to 1 within the world of the game as in ours.
Yeah, and another part of that is that Baby is an artist. She has a little zine that she's working on throughout the game. And it is a sort of contrast between her as a small, poor developer trying to make her own art and the outside world, which is like going to shit. And it is maybe a little difficult not to see the similarities between that and the artist making the game, who is often making these non commercial, very pointed political ideas within this work while still still trying to make art, still trying to like sort of make something new and interesting. And yeah, it's just a very clear comparison to make.
Yeah, it's like yeah, it's really both it's both very sweet and kind of heartbreaking to play these games. I say kind of heartbreaking. I think very heartbreaking is a way to put it for me, in that it doesn't really offer any solutions, this game. There's not really any real way out for BB. She's just kind of trapped in this world, but there is kind of a joy to persisting and being this kind of horror movie victim who never really gets killed but keeps evading all the monsters, and you keep wanting her to evade all these monsters things.
All right. So, quick thoughts at the end before we go into our recommendations. I just want to say Murder Dog 4, The Trial of Murder Dog, is very funny. It's about this sort of very obviously guilty character who has a thirst for blood and is very clearly killed the victim. But you're sort of in this Ace Attorney kind of space where he's supposed to be defending this dog, and it's very funny, but it's also like sort of criticizing the justice system in a way. But really, if I really had to say, it's mostly focused on the humor and the comedic situation that it's in. And I just really wanted to mention it because I just really loved it so much without me
It's a
having
really
much
funny
deeper
game.
thought into it. Yeah.
I think I have too many recommendations, so I'm just going to list them off. Space Funeral, as mentioned before, Murder Dog 4, Trial of the Murder Dog. No, there are not any previous Murder Dog installments. It's only the fourth one. There's Crime Zone, which I think is a great rumination on kind of the police system and kind of like a kind of precursor to Anthology of the Killer, also in a way. Drill Killer, which is another funny kind of bit about horror movies, Goblet Grotto, like I mentioned before, if you want to play a game that most technically resembles what most people think video games are, Goblet Grotto is your way to go. And it'll still be extremely confusing, don't worry. So you'll run into that also. 50 Short Games is very interesting in that it was made after a period where he found success within the indie space with Space Funeral and Goblet Grotto, and he didn't know what to make. And he was worried that he was going to have to like take a lot of caution in making the next game. So his response to that was to make as many shitty games as possible to kind of dilute and fuck up his whole gameography. And so that's kind of his response. He basically got home from work every day for like I think a period of 3 months and made a game in one night and uploaded whatever he had made. So it's very interesting to see like the shitty like stream of consciousness scraps that he's made as a result of that. Harmony Summer Hardpack Tape 11 in 1. Ignore everything Offer said about it. It's great. Go play it. Don't take any negative things he said about it. It's a wonderful, joyous experience. You should also play Glimby because she is a wonderful fella who you should meet. A very wonderful person. I've went out with dinner with her multiple times, and I think she's a very wonderful feller. Magic Wand is really interesting. I don't even know how to describe Magic Wand. It might be his most incoherent game. It started out, maybe I shouldn't even explain it. It started out with him wanting to make a Dragon Quest JRPG like pastiche, and he wrote up a narrative for it, which he was going to do in a really oblique way. And then he kept changing the draft in ways that where the narrative became more and more incoherent even to him. And then he just kind of like implemented parts of it in a game, not caring about whether or not he actually conveyed that narrative. He just wanted to convey the experience of playing, like remembering a JRPG years after you finished it, not really knowing what you did in the middle 50 hours of the 100 hours you played. So the result is just kind of this extreme mess and blur of tile sets and non sequitur dialogue, just extreme bullshit. My brain was so fried by the end of it. I don't even know how to describe it. I think you should play it if you played all of his other games. 10 Beautiful Postcards is the biggest version of what he's trying to do. It's definitely more accessible than Magic Wand, but also it is a game where I saw it was 2 hours and I thought, oh, cool, it's only 2 hours. And I had to physically lie down and take a nap because I was so mentally exhausted an hour into playing the game. And of course, also Anthology of the Killer, which is now, and I'm not even kidding, I think in my top 5 favorite games of all time. I really love Anthology of the Killer. If you want a more coherent narrative experience, go play that one and maybe Space Funeral. But if you're interested in what we had to say, really just play all the games I mentioned. And what about you?
I wouldn't say that there's like any duds in this collection here. I do want to keep my recommendations short personally. So I'm going to stick to Murder Dog 4, The Trial of Murder Dog, just because I think it's the funniest of the lot. 10 Beautiful Postcards, because I think that if you want to sort of see what is going on in most of these games, you can see an element of that in 10 Beautiful Postcards. So I'd say it's one of the more representative games in the collection. And Anthology of the Killer, which is my personal favorite as well. It's just so incredible as a game, and I want everyone to play this. I want everyone to play Anthology of the Killer.
I really can't stress enough how wonderful it is. Okay, and also if you're really curious about the way he works and how the Catamites or what the Catamites is trying to do, luckily for you, he's written literal years and years of blog posts detailing as much as he can what his working philosophy is. Slight problem in my subjective opinion, he has this very, let's just say, leftist theory way of writing in that he writes so much that it kind of hurts my brain and I'm not really sure what the overall point is. That's my impression of it. He's
I wouldn't
maintained
even say that. I feel it's very flow of consciousness kind of writing while still being very wordy and somewhat academic. So it's just that combination of big ideas while it's all coming at you all at once. I kind of honestly I kind of want to do a minor anti-recommendation of the blog because it was just so difficult to read. Maybe like
no.
just read an article and see if it's good for you and if you're able to get something out of it. But I had some difficulty there personally.
I want to do an anti-recommendation of his anti-recommendations because I think it is really worth reading. Maybe this is even the point that by reading what he's trying to say specifically, you walk out with even more questions about what he's trying to do, and that's to like mystify his work even more. He has a current blog he keeps up with called My Friend Pokey, where he talks about states in the gaming industry. It's also worth reading his previous stuff, like Mystery Bog, which he wrote when he was in college, and every single blog post is like he doesn't intentionally try to do it, but like every blog post is basically him trying to like compare the games that he's making with Samuel Beckett plays. He won't stop talking about Samuel Beckett and what he's trying to, and how he's trying to put Samuel Beckett's philosophy in video games. It's very confusing and all over the place. I love it. Yeah. But I've highlighted a couple blog posts that I think are interesting. He has behind the scenes like posts that you kind of have to pay for, but I think are very interesting for his more recent games like Anthology of the Killer and 10 Beautiful Postcards. Hey, if you don't like it, just don't read it. You'll be confused
Okay.
either way, so
Yep.
it's fine.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to agree to disagree on that one. Nothing to be done. That's a Samuel Beckett reference for all those Samuel Beckett heads.
Who's
Yeah. So
Samuel
do we
Beckett?
have nothing else? Who?
Yep. I don't know. I thought you said something that's now. It must have been the wind or something. Who cares?
Okay, so for our next episode, I'm sort of on the fence in between two. So my strategy with this has been to sort of pick someone who is just as different as I can to the previous people that we have talked about because I like variety. I like playing a lot of different stuff and I want to see what is out there. And I'm going to I want to have Galvin choose between these two because there are some demographics that we have not talked about as much. One of these is women. Should we talk about a women developer or perhaps the most marginalized? Do you want to talk about a AAA developer? Because we haven't done any of those either. So, which of these two very very marginalized groups within our podcast? What do you prefer?
Very hard to say. I mean, they're both equally oppressed, so it's kind of hard. It's kind of like affirmative action in determining who I have to save. It's like going on a GoFundMe account and choosing which person I want to live and which person I want to die. I would have to say, if I had a preference, though, let me just flip a coin here. It looks like it landed on woman. I think I would like to do the woman one.
Damn. Damn, I was gonna make you play some big AAA developer so I could get you to stop having a completionist idea of trying to play every single game. But nope,
You know,
I'll have to.
if it makes you feel better, we can just do this one woman episode and then we kind of never have to do one again. We could just keep doing
Yeah, then,
AAA games if you want,
and then we can just keep on doing AAA developers, keep talking about all the very important men in our lives, and keep
Yes,
doing
yes.
a Kojima and Miyamoto and a Kamiya and everything. But no, I want to talk about because you've talked about your personal favorite game developer. I want to talk about my personal favorite game developer, and that is Christine Love. I'm pretty sure I have difficulty remembering this, but I think that she is the first video game developer that I could actually name and say like, oh yeah, I played her games. So I really want to revisit a lot of her games because I still haven't caught up on all of them, and I think there's a good opportunity to do that. And yeah, for this one, all the ones I've played, I'd like to recommend Analog: A Hate Story and its sequel, Hate Plus. A lot of these games are very technology focused and romance focused, mostly visual novels, and I think they're all very unique and interesting. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about them. What are your experiences with Christine Love games?
My experience of Christine Love is you forcing Christine Love onto me.
Hell yeah!
I mean, I did it with the Catamites. And no, I mean, legitimately, I do like her work also. I would have told you otherwise if I didn't. I played Digital: A Love Story, I played Analog: A Hate Story, and I think those two are really about it. I guess I guess I'll start playing Don't Take It Personally, Babe, or whatever, and then also Lady Killer in a Bind. I know there's a bunch I haven't played, so I'll probably try and get around to those before we come back.
Yeah. Yeah, and the full title is Don't Take It Personally, Baby. It just ain't your story, which is one of the best names in video games.
You can kind of say it's her Harmony Summer Hardpack 11 in 1. In that, it has a very long title that's hard to say.
So true. Yeah, I basically haven't played anything after 8 Plus came out because I don't know, that's just when I sort of fell off. I bought all her games. I have all her games on Steam. I just haven't gotten around to playing them. So yeah, I got to keep on doing that. And yeah, I'll have to wait till the next episode to finish them.
You must play every video game made by whatever person we're covering at that very moment. Otherwise, you won't understand them, okay? Just do it.
You know, just because you said that, I'm going to dabble the next 5 people, just playing a little bit of each game and never finishing them.
Just with every ball, I'm going to say the name of the person. You're going to be like, who? Is that what we're covering?
Exactly. All right. How do we end these?
As always, I'm Galvin.
And I'm Author Function.
Thanks for listening.